Okay, let's see what happens. I will talk fast. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm PJ, and I'm going to be briefly sharing an approach to making one-shot team teaching hopefully more meaningful for everyone involved, including the JTE, the ALT, and most importantly, the students. So for over 10 years, I was at Tokai University's Kyoiku Kaihatsu Kenkyujo, which was established to support the math, science, and English teachers at Tokai's 14 attached schools around the country, mostly through multiple kind of ongoing long-term faculty development programs. So that's my most significant experience working with ALTs. One of the perennial difficulties that JTEs and ALTs both reported to us was this kind of lingering doubt about what the goals of team teaching were and how to meet them. And so as we observed team taught classes, some scenarios emerged which have been actually described in countless papers and presentations over the years, ever since really the JET program started in 1987. In the first, the JTE takes on the role of the primary instructor. This is especially in 4 skills class, which tend to emphasize reading above the other 3 skills, and really anytime vocabulary and grammar is being introduced. In the second scenario, the ALT is the primary instructor, especially in conversation classes and activities they bring with them on one-shot visits. In a third scenario, teachers take turns directing activities, but they're basically sharing the duties of a solo teacher. So all 3 of these scenarios perpetuate, I think, various dichotomies in both the teachers and the students' assumptions that ALTs and JTEs have different sets of goals, that they teach differently, and they even specialize in speaking and using 2 different versions of English. So it doesn't matter whether I'm speaking to an ALT group, a JTE group, or a mixed group. This is one of the key questions that I feel get to the core of team teaching's potential. So what do we do as a team which could not be done by a JTE team, an ALT team, or a bilingual solo JTE or ALT? I mean, I studied Spanish for 9 years. I was never taught by a team. I was never taught actually by a native speaker. All my Spanish teachers were Mrs. Rabinovitz and Mrs. Jackson and Mr. Thompson. These are not Spanish names. So the idea that you have to have one of each, the fact that we have one of each is great. It's a resource. But how do we require that we have both of them? So this is a question that seems to cause the most alarm, especially among teachers who are in that positive, supportive partnership, and they do have the time and energy to plan and teach turn-taking lessons. They usually say, oh, you've got to see our lesson. Our lesson is great. We're organized. We're on time. We are 50-50. But still, my question is, what are you doing that couldn't be done by one of these other model relationships? So I'm going to share an approach that we developed to help make the most of visits by an ALT, no matter how regular or how one-shot. So we were on the writing team for the junior high school level of One World English, and we were tasked with creating team teaching manuals for all 3 years. So this is not a commercial plug for One World, especially because the materials I'm showing you are for the previous version of One World. The new version of One World is just come out last month. And so this is the previous version of the team teaching manual. So our goals for each 45-minute timetable were to require minimal time creating materials and preparing. We also wanted to clarify the goals of the team taught lesson, to introduce, recycle, and maybe extend the content and target language from the textbook. This would help ALTs feel that rather than just swooping in and conducting a completely unrelated activity, they were contributing more meaningfully to their students' education. And it would also help the JTEs more efficiently cover the textbook contents without interruptions. And we also hope that students would feel that their learning was more efficient than we'll do the textbook for 5 days, and then we'll interrupt it with find someone who. And then we'll do the textbook for 5 days, and then we'll do a debate on what is better, cats or dogs. So it was not working really for anybody. So also help teachers and students feel like they'd accomplished something that day. We see a lot of lessons, which is 45 minutes of let's do the vocabulary, and tomorrow we'll finish the vocabulary and then we'll do a little grammar. And at the end of the week, we're still not quite sure what we've done today. So here's an example from One World. This is first year. So you can see that the text is quite basic, though it's a later lesson. This is lesson 8. Part 3, very, very short. We've only got 7 turns in this dialogue. So there was a warm-up activity on the previous page, and you can see some grammar in the lower left. We asked teachers to cover these on the solo JTE teaching day, because that's not necessarily the best way to take advantage of the ALT being in the room. So what I did for each part of each lesson was create a quick reference page, which you can see here. For each phase of the lesson, both the JTE and the ALT has a role. Even it's as simple as the ALT asking the JTE, what's today's main activity in the introduction phase? So the main activity is a content goal to learn about the ALT's and JTE's favorite seasons in this example. So the JTE starts by asking the ALT about their favorite season, then afterwards asks the student to share what the ALT said. And the JTE takes notes on the board and confirms with the ALT if there's any confusion. Then they switch with the ALT asking about the JTE's favorite season, and then asking for the students' help and taking notes on the board. So at the bottom, you can see kind of a board plan. It's 2 versions of the same conversation. This is suggested notes. We're not asking teachers to follow this or memorize this. So depending on the students' level and needs, they may repeat both of the dialogues and even have students repeat each line before asking students to do the dialogues using only the notes from the board. There's also an extra reference page with a sample dialogue that teachers can look at before class. And then, of course, teachers are not required or even recommended to try memorizing the dialogue, but just to make an effort to try using some of the target vocabulary and grammar so students are exposed to these key expressions. And then only for the last 10 minutes are students opening their books and looking at the reading and confirming the language that they've already been exposed to for the first 35 minutes. So this reinforces the idea that the textbook is the tool. The goal of the English class is not to master the textbook content or language, but to communicate about it and to use it for communication. And then the teaching manual also features worksheets to supplement each timetable. So depending on the class pace, this could be completed in class or maybe at home or even a combination. Here's another example. This is from book 2. So still, it's not a whole lot of content here. But instead of wading in and saying, okay, repeat after me, we're going to do the vocabulary, we're going to do the grammar. Again, going through and asking the JTE to share a similar situation. Here we've got an explanation of bobbing for apples. So we have the ALT asking the JTE, what is happening in this picture? It's yo-yo tsuri. And then the ALT can explain the bobbing for apples. And again, they're taking notes on the board with the students' help. And then they're, depending on the students' level and their needs, repeating it, having students speak from the dialogue. And then the last step, looking at the textbook to confirm it. And here's another example. So you can see it may feel a little repetitive to go through the same pattern every time. But again, it does depend on how often the class is being team taught. Some team teachers operate twice a week. Some classes are only team taught once a month. So it really depends, but the more students have this experience and the more teachers work with this, the more rote it becomes. It becomes natural. Teachers are not so wedded to trying to memorize a dialogue, but it's something that they can kind of come up with naturally. It feels a bit like a manzai. Teachers feel like feels a little fake. So, Mr. Tanaka, what are we doing today? It's that kind of feeling. But again, it's helping the JTE model a communicative relationship with a non-Japanese person. And also, it's helpful once teachers get used to this and they don't need to refer to this so much, especially if at their school they don't really have access to the teacher's manuals. For some strange reason, teachers' manuals tend to be kept locked in a cabinet somewhere, and people don't even know about this. And after spending 6,000 years of my life on these team teaching manuals, to ask teachers who are using this textbook, so what do you think about the team teaching manual? And they had no idea it even existed because they've never seen it before. So again, this is just one model that we developed for this. I think it can be very easily applied to really any textbook you're using, even elementary, certainly in high school levels. I shared these 3 samples with Nick, who I believe is making them available to anybody who's interested. But again, keep in mind that these are from the previous version of One World. So new versions are being done for the current version. So was that 10 minutes?
Yes, that was
I've
yeah,
never spoken that fast
11
in my
kind
life.
of. But yeah, first of all, round of applause. Pretty straightforward and simple. Just to confirm, yes, the files that you shared with me are gonna go on the Agora Drive, which is gonna be shared with everybody else through our newsletter.